Excuse me. Yeah, hello. Back again. I haven't done one of these in a while now. How can I best explain this? Taken a sabbatical for the last month or so, because I wanted to do a really good YouTube presentation on the Führerbunker. I was never really happy with some of the presentations that I'd done, and I thought I wanted to do a real go a little bit more in depth rather than just sort of skirting across the surface. I'd like to thank all those that have watched my previous clips, and I hope you got some insight as to what it really was in those last desperate days of World War II. What I've got with me, I've got a stack of books that I'm going to reread. It's not like I've got to read every page, it's just I've got to find out those bits because I want to just focus on the bunker and nothing else. This book here I've got is Cornelius Ryan's The Last Battle. This is the book that started it all off for me. I read this book back in the 80s, and I was so enthralled because it wasn't just about Hitler in the bunker, and it wasn't about the last battle, the battle for Berlin. It was about the people and the city of Berlin. And ever since then, I've really wanted to be able to find out as much as I could as in relation to the city. For me, the years that I'd really like to focus on is between 1914 and 1994, because I believe that for the Berliners, the war didn't end until the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was in '89. However, I said it was 1994, and that's when the Allies and the Russian troops left. So since 1945, Berlin, on both sides of the wall, was under occupation, which is quite astonishing. So Cornelius Ryan, The Last Battle. Two of his books were turned into film. One was The Longest Day, and the other one was A Bridge Too Far. And I'd love to see this made into a film because I think it would be fantastic if they ever did. Highly recommended, this one. The next book is The Last Days of Hitler by Hugh Trevor Roper, and he's recognised as a scholar of World War II, and he was given the task of actually interviewing a lot of those that were in the bunker at the time, shortly after the war. And the reason being is because the Russians were confusing the Allies in relation to what they were saying. You know, Stalin was accusing the British, I think, of hiding Hitler in the English zone, because Berlin was split into zones. You had the Russian zone, you had the American zone, you had the British zone, and you had the French zone. The French were given a zone, but the Americans wouldn't give any of their territory to the French. So it was the British that actually gave France territory for them, so that they could create their own zone. So there were 4 zones, and if you think about it, that's 44 years Berlin was under occupation, and it was split into zones. It's astonishing, because say in Vienna, for example, it was only until 1955 that the Allies, including the Russians, were able to give authority back to the Austrian government. That's to say that the zones that were once so much part of the city were no longer needed. If you ever see The Third Man, they'll mention the zones. It's a very important part of post-war World War II history. So Trevor Roper, he was able to talk to a lot of these people, and he was able to find out all the details and who, what, when, where, how and why. It's a bit dry, bit condescending, you know, you get the tone of the book. The tone of the book is very, you know, you can tell that this guy went to a public school like Eton or something like that, and it has that sort of snobbish tone to it. You know, maybe snob is too hard of the tone comes across very much like that when you read it. However, don't let that throw you. If you really want to get into what happened in the Fuhrer bunker, I'd recommend this book. The Cornelius Rhine book is more about the city and about the fighting, and rather than focusing just on Hitler and his inner circle in the bunker. But this is dedicated, strictly dedicated to the Fuhrer bunker. Highly recommended this one. Let's see. This is a very good book. This is a book by Anton Joachim Schraller. I mean, I butchered his surname, but it's the best I can do because I find it very difficult to pronounce it. This is, I'd say this is probably my favourite book. This book is also dedicated to the last days of Adolf Hitler in the Fuhrer bunker, and it also has testimonies. So you actually read, or they've got like Trudeljunge and Günther and others like those in the bunker who during the course of, you know, the last 40-50 years, or at least I'd say when they were still alive, so they were being interviewed in, like, say, like in the late 40s and in the middle, in the 50s as well, and where the memory is still fresh, and it actually gives a quote. So I remember, I read that Trevor Roper said that they were a hardy lot, all those that were in the bunker, and here's a photograph of the entourage. So you can see a lot of the entourage were in the, I don't know if you can see that. And you can see the secretaries. Trudeljunge, for example, has appeared in lots of documentaries. There's Trudeljunge at the bottom of the photo there. It's Trudeljunge. She's interviewed a lot. She's in the World at War documentary. Is probably the best documentary in World War II ever made. And then Mengerhausen. He was the one that burnt Hitler's body. It's not a very good photograph, that one there. My index finger. You can see that. And this is modern day Berlin. This picture there, that's modern day Berlin. Vossstrasse is there, so that's where the Hitler Chancellery would have been. Of course, it's been torn down long ago. But if you can see where that cross is, that's where the bunker is. So once this lockdown or this COVID ends and we're allowed to go to Germany, that's the location that you've got to go to. That's where you've got to go. This is a brilliant book. It's perhaps my favourite related to the bunker. If you're interested in it, it's called The Last Days of Hitler. The legend, the evidence and the truth. Highly recommended. Oh. See. So we'll keep into the theme. I've got here another book. It's called the Hitler book, The Secret Dossier, Prepared for Stalin. So this was done by the Russians. You can see it's quite a thick book, but ideally, I mean, it focuses, in the final chapters of the book is more of a focus on the bunker, as to opposed to the rest of the book, which talks about, you know, the assassination attempt and the Battle of the Bulge and things like that. For Stalin, you kind of sort of think, well, what did they do in relation to, you know, when they wrote the document? Because they're saying, well, they have to sort of, you know, write it for Stalin, and of course there might be a bias in how it was prepared and how it was written for Stalin to read, because, you know, Stalin was a tyrant himself, so he may have sort of, you know, adjusted the evidence for him, for his eyes only, sort of thing. But what makes this book unique is the fact that it's very difficult to go into the Russian archive. So those that want to study World War II and study the documents that they seized at the end of the war, you know, it's very difficult to actually have access to the archive. So there's still things that we need to learn, simply because they have the documents in Russia, but it's just being able to actually get to see them. That's what makes this book quite unique. It's more in keeping with the Last Battle by Cornelius Ryan, but it's still worth investigating. I think from the Russian perspective, we really don't know. And those books that were written by the Russians, there are mistakes in them, and a lot of propaganda. So you have to be mindful of that. Anyway, this one's called the Hitler book, The Secret Dossier, Prepared for Stalin. I'd recommend it if you're interested. Let's see. Okay, this one's by David Irving. It's The Secret Diaries of Hitler's Doctor. The newly discovered journals of Theo Morell, the physician who treated Hitler to the last days of his life. I would say, in my opinion, Theo Morell is perhaps one of the closest, if not the closest, to Adolf Hitler, because he was injecting him every day. I mean, it's astonishing how long Theo Morell was in Hitler's employ. I mean, he was there, say, from I believe 1936 or 1938. I'm not sure. I'd have to check, but he was there before the war. That's for sure, up until the 21st of April. And there is a part in it where he. I mean, there is a description in this book which is quite telling. And it says, during the whole of the final weeks of April 15th to the 21st, Morell related a few days later to an American journalist, I gave him shots of glucose. On Saturday, April the 21st, he was dejected, and there had been an important conference on the evening before. I wanted to give him another shot, but he grabbed me and lost his temper, shouting, and then he knew precisely that I was going to inject him with morphine. This is true. It is probable that Hitler feared that Doctor was going to drug him so that the generals could smuggle him out of Berlin to the south against his will. Morell protested his innocence, but Hitler screamed, "Do you think I'm crazy?" He continued to rant at Morell, threatened to have him shot, and finally ordered him to go home, take off his uniform as the Führer's physician, and act as if you'd never seen me. Whereupon, wrote Tanya Long, describing the final humiliation of the Doctor in the New York Times, the physician collapsed at the feet of the Führer. Again, Hitler shrieked at him, "Get out of that uniform, put on some plain clothes and go back to being the doctor of the Kurfürstendamm, where these male violent words ringing in his ears, Muriel fled to the airfield at Gatow. That's really telling. That's 9 days before Hitler took his life. So this is a diary written by Muriel, and Muriel wrote the diary and what he gave Hitler during all those years. And towards the end, I mean, you know, Hitler was he was so sick, he was so ill, and as I was saying earlier, you know, I hope I haven't lost my train of thought, that Muriel was perhaps one of the closest to Hitler. So Theo Muriel, his physician, Martin Bormann, his fixer, and Albert Speer, his architect. And you may have seen Albert Speer, you may have seen what Martin Bormann looked like, but I doubt you will have seen Theo Muriel. Here's a picture of what Theo Muriel looked like. I mean, the guy was huge. There's another photo. Let's have a look if I can find it. There we go. I mean, that's a side-on photo. It was massive. And he said he was really noisy when he ate, and a lot of people were put off by his table manners. But I think it says a lot for Theo Muriel, for the fact that towards the end of Hitler's life, that Hitler would send him away because he was the one that was giving him his medication. And if you suddenly go cold turkey, or you don't have a doctor that's prescribing the same things, it may be really difficult for him to keep going. And he I suspect he was in a lot of pain in those last days of his life. So he went on April the 21st, I believe it was April the 21st, and Hitler actually died, or he took his own life on the 30th. So yeah, 9 days. It's not an easy book to read because it talks about all the names of all the different medication that he had. So you may have to keep looking up. Only unless, of course, you're a doctor or studying to be a doctor, this might be interesting. But what's so unique about it is because the diary is written at the time. It's not, you know, a historian looking back at this. Was written as it was, as it happened. So for that alone, this is a valuable piece of history. So it's called The Secret Diaries of Hitler's Doctor by David Irving. Let's see what I've got here. This is a tomb of a book. Look at this. This is Albert Speer, His Battle with Truth by Gitta Sereni. And she had the privilege of meeting up with Albert Speer, interviewing him. And in my previous presentations I've mentioned about Albert Speer and my reckoning that he knew a lot more about what was going on. However, I have seen an interview with Gitta Sereni, who's contradicting that observation. But maybe she didn't have access to the archive and the documentation like we do today, that we have access to today. But still, it's a very, very insightful and interesting book, and she's very honest. There is a great photograph I must show you of the author and Albert Speer in his home. Can you see that? And photos have a lot, can say perhaps more than words can. So it's a very I suspect you're very privileged to be in a position that you can actually interview the subject of who you're going to write about. And I believe that Albert Speer was very much a person of his time. So to actually get into the mind of someone like Albert Speer, I mean, it's a great help if you can actually talk to him. But you get a deeper understanding of the man or of a person than if you were to treat your subject retrospectively, looking back on him and only talking to people that knew him or only having access to the documentation. Again, this isn't all about, you know, his time in the bunker. However, I have found out that when he did go back to the bunker, Hitler was pleased to see him, because for Hitler, there were two people that he was very close to, or not two people, one person, which was Albert Speer, he was closest to, and the other was his dog Blondie. He was very, very close to his dog. I mean, in the last days, that's all he was talking about was dogs. I mean, it must have been pretty boring, because he'd always have tea with his secretaries, and the discussion was dogs. So it must have been really boring for his secretaries to have to listen to his monologues about talking about dogs. But yeah, this is a tomb of a book. I mean, I haven't even started this yet, you know. But when I do my presentation on the Führer bunker, I will then read the chapter related to those last days between Hitler and Albert Speer. So I'm looking forward to that. This is a book on the Hitler Chancellery, and I asked myself the question. I said, if I were to go to Berlin and I was to be a tour guide, could I stand in Vossstrasse, which is Voss Street, where the Hitler Chancellery once stood, and talk for an hour about the subject? And I have to be honest with you, I couldn't. I just don't know enough to be able to talk about it. And it would mean I literally having to read this book and digest it all, every page, in order for me to be able to give a presentation and to be able to talk about it. And I have to be honest with you, I don't really know that much about the Chancellery, except that it was built in record time. And not only was Albert Speer, his architect, a brilliant architect, he was brilliant at planning things. His planning of actually making the Hitler Chancellery in less than a year, and he had workforces working literally around the clock to get the building finished. A lot of what actually happened in the Chancellery was related to funerals, but they had funerals in the building. It really was a sort of a building to let everybody know the power of the Nazi regime and of Hitler's power. So let everybody know he's there. You know, it's almost like the Queen at Windsor Castle. She puts up the flag to let everybody know that she's in her castle. Well, it's similar to the Hitler Chancellery, and where Hitler has such power that if he wants something to be done, he will just give the order and it will be done. There are a lot of instances where he would suggest things without real intention behind them. His inner circle would listen to what he has to say, and then they would carry it out, even though it wasn't like a direct order that he wanted it done. They just heard him say something, you know, about he wants, I don't know, he wants another building built, but there wasn't any real intent behind it. And then they go and build the building, but it wasn't really his intention to, you know, it wasn't like he said, oh, you know, these are my plans, this is what I want to have done, and it would be done. No, it was almost like he would be drinking tea or something, or talking to his dignitaries, the inner circle, and they would be taking notes. and he would suggest something, and all of a sudden they'd come and do it. It's astonishing, but that's the power he had. I've got these these two DVDs. These talk about the Hitler Chancellery, but not just that, about the street. So I've actually got this. It's called Vossstrasse. So Vossstrasse means Voss Street, and that's where the Hitler Chancellery was. And this is computer generated, and they just tell you all about the history of a particular street. Now, if you were to go there to Berlin and walk down that street, you wouldn't. If you didn't know what was there, you would just walk down it and not realise the historical significance of Vossstrasse. It's astonishing. This is another one. And I have to say that Christopher Neubauer, who's the chap that did these documentaries and created these historical marvels, is the only way I can describe it. It's a remarkable thing to do, because you have to get the actually the presentation of the way that the concept of how you would do the computer generation is, I don't know how he did it, but he did a great job. This man here is Rohush Misch. He was the second to last person to leave the Hitler bunker. He was the second to last person, and he was the last survivor of the Führer bunker. I'm not sure when he actually died, but he made it into his 90s. He was the last survivor of the bunker, and he was also like Trudel Junge, who would if somebody were to contact him and want to talk to him about what happened, he was always available, and he'd always speak about what actually went on in the bunker to the very end. And in the house that he had in Berlin at the time, he still lived in. So all his life, he lived in the house that he bought in the 30s to the day he died, and he'd always visit the location of where the Führer bunker was. So he also helped the making. He actually gave some information to the makers of Valkyrie, to Tom Cruise, that great film Valkyrie with Tom Cruise. He actually was able to give some information and tell him some of his experiences, and what value that was to the makers of the film, because it actually sort of helps bring the past back to life. So this one, however, doesn't have any subtitles for some reason, which is a shame, because he's shown the computer graphics of the location, and he gives his recollections. For a start, he will suddenly say, "Oh, I can't remember. Oh, I can't remember that, and I can't remember that," and all of a sudden, something tweaks in his mind, and then he's able to explain what those buildings were and what they actually did in them. So these two documentaries there, I'd highly recommend them. I'm sure they're still in print if you were to look for them. So Rohush Misch erzählt, which means Rohush Misch talks. Erzählt means talk, and Vossstrasse, which is Voss Street. That's the street where the Hitler Chancellery used to be. Highly recommend these documentaries if you're interested. And my last one, Fallen Eagle, The Last Days of the Third Reich, which is this one. Again, it doesn't really talk too much about the Führer bunker, if at all, but what's unique about it is actually gives descriptions. And I'm always fascinated with the roads, because in a lot of the documentaries that I've seen and the original footage of Berlin, you'd see how clear the roads were, and you'd sort of wonder, how is it that these roads were so clear? And it's one of those questions that I'll always ask until I'll get an answer. And I believe in one of the pages I was able to find something, a brief description. It was barely a paragraph long, but I think this book actually sort of does give you a feel, an overview of what actually Berlin was like when the Allies actually got to Berlin. But the Russians got there first, and Stalin was very, very suspicious of the Allies. He wanted to make sure that he took Berlin before anybody else did. So when the Allies eventually did get to Berlin, they would then give their description as to what it was that they saw in Berlin when they got there. Okay, so that pretty much concludes the presentation. I hope I haven't stumbled over my words too much, and that you've got an idea of some of the books that I'm going to review, or at least I'm going to take notes from various sources, and then give a presentation on the Führer bunker, and just the Führer bunker and nothing else. Anyway, that concludes everything that I want to say, and I'd like to wish you all the very best, and auf Wiedersehen.